Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, you are at the Constitutional Law Fourth Amendment Rights presentation with the Dominican Day Parade and the Latino Justice. I am Dorian Rojas. I am currently the Development Chair of the National Dominican Day Parade. I will say that's my job by night. My job by day is I am an immigration attorney and the director of the Immigration Project at Volunteers for Leadership. This is one of many leadership workshop series that we put forth to educate the community and to raise awareness. The very first thing that I will do this evening is introduce you to our chair, Ms. Cristina Contreras. She is the Chief Executive Officer of New York City Health and Hospitals Metropolitan. She is going to welcome us all with a video, but I would like to tell you a few words about her. Ms. Contreras is a native of the Dominican Republic. She has over 27 years of experience as a healthcare leader. After ascending through various leadership roles in New York City, through the New York City Health and Hospital System, she is now a CEO. She is passionate about improving healthcare access for underserved and immigrant communities. She has implemented strategies to enhance patient satisfaction, increase efficiencies, and improve quality. She holds degrees from Lehman College, Fordham University, and Baruch College, and she is recognized for her community service and leadership. She's received numerous awards, including the Healthcare Hero 2021 award and the 2022 Manhattan Power Woman Award. As you know, she chairs the National Dominican Day Parade, and in the same nurturing and spirit of community service, we run this series, right? And she serves on the board of Rain Total Care. So without further ado, here's a video from her welcoming you.
Hello, and welcome to our Leadership Workshop Series. I'm Cristina Contreras, Chair of the NAP-DDP Board of Directors, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. First, I want to extend my sincere appreciation to our sponsors and partners who have made this event possible. Your support is invaluable to our mission of promoting education and leadership in our community. One way we do this is through our annual parade, which celebrates our rich cultural heritage and brings people from all over the world together. Thank you for your commitment to our mission. I also want to give a shout out to Dorian Rojas, Esquire, who organized this event and brought us such a knowledgeable speaker. Dorian's dedication and hard work have made this event possible, and we are grateful for your passion and support. We offer scholarships to deserving students. We are proud to report that we have provided close to $1 million in scholarships for students of Dominican heritage. Today, we are here for our leadership workshop. Our goal is to bring together experts and professionals to share their knowledge and insight on important issues related to education and leadership. Today's workshop will feature Latino Justice Associate Counsel, Norma Esquivel, Esquire, who will discuss issues related to search, seizure, privacy, and other Fourth Amendment topics. The workshop will also include a Q&A session where attendees can ask the speaker questions related to Fourth Amendment rights. The goal of the workshop is to empower attendees with knowledge and information that will help them protect their constitutional rights. We believe that education and leadership are the keys to success, and we are committed to providing opportunities for people to learn and grow. I hope you will find today's workshop informative and valuable. Once again, thank you to our sponsors and partners, and a special thank you to the Dominican Bar Association and Dorian Rojas for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you to our chair. She thanks me a lot, but also without her, this would not be possible. As you know from her bio, she is very committed to community service and enhancing the voices of the underserved. moving right along, we want to thank Norma Esquivel for joining us today and being our expert on the topic. So Norma Esquivel serves as an associate counsel at the Latino Justice PRLDEF. Prior to joining Latino Justice, she was a criminal defense attorney with the Bronx Defenders. So you know that she has all the knowledge, where she represented nearly 1,000 Bronx residents charged with misdemeanors and felonies at all stages of litigation. While at Bronx Defenders, Norma also completed a rotation with the New York Immigration Family Unit Project, where she represented non-citizens with criminal convictions in deportation proceedings. So if you're someone who is on the webinar today and you're undocumented, I'm sure you will get a lot of valuable information. Norma earned her JD from Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, where she was an Nathaniel Gates Scholar. She was also the recipient of the Archie A. Gorfinkel, I hope I'm saying that right, award for her accomplishments in the field of criminal law. So welcome, Norma, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so honored to be here. And I just want to begin by talking a little bit about our organization. First and foremost, I also have a PowerPoint that I would love to share with all of you. So let's see if this is. All right, can you just confirm you can see this?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so this presentation is going to be focusing on your rights as it relates to police encounters on the street. So one thing I want to say is a lot of times we can get really overwhelmed with information. So this is just going to be an overarching, really distilled primer on what you can do to protect yourself during an encounter with the police. And my hope is that you can also impart this knowledge with your loved ones and your community members so that we can continue to empower our own communities and ensure that we are advocating for ourselves in a manner that is effective, but also filled with dignity. So I want to begin just by explaining a little bit as to what Latino Justice does. I'm an associate counsel at Latino Justice, and Latino Justice works to create a more just society by using and challenging the rule of law to secure transformative, equitable, and accessible justice. And we do this by empowering our communities. So I'm really thrilled to be able to be here to share this PowerPoint with you all. So I want to begin by just giving you a little overview of what we're going to be talking about here today during this session. So we are going to be talking about the Fourth Amendment, but we're also going to delve a little bit into the Fifth Amendment and the First Amendment. So the first question you might be asking yourself is, well, what exactly are my rights? You have the following constitutional rights as it relates to the police and to other similar government actors. So you have the right to remain silent. That's from the Fifth Amendment. The right to be free from searches that are unreasonable or seizures that are unreasonable. That's from the Fourth Amendment. And you also have First Amendment rights. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like with police. And I also want to assure all of you that it doesn't matter whether or not you're a citizen. These are your constitutional rights in the US, so they apply to you. So if you ever hear someone saying that you don't have the same rights as them because you don't have citizenship in this country, please note that that's patently untrue, and that the whole purpose of the Constitution is to ensure that you also have rights that you can exercise in this country. So what is the right to remain silent? I'm sure many of you have heard that. My first personal exposure to the right to remain silent was when I would watch Law and Order SVU all the time. And I realized that I never really fully understood what that meant, right? When I think of right to remain silent, I think of an interrogation room. I think of there's already been an arrest, you're under investigation, and now you're in this tiny room with detectives and they're asking you a bunch of questions, and you can say over and over again that you have the right to remain silent. But I want to expand our conception of what that means. So the right to remain silent isn't just applicable in the courtroom or when you're in a small little interrogation room with detectives. It applies when you are having conversations with the police. So let's get into it a little bit. The Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution gives every person the right not to answer questions by a police officer or government agent. And the Fifth Amendment applies to street encounters with the police. I want to remind all of you that everything and anything you say can and will be used against you. Yes, everything. The reason I say that is because, as was mentioned earlier, I used to be a criminal defense attorney, and I represented a lot of people who would give statements to the police and not realize that they were in fact giving statements to the police. So even saying something like, I didn't do it or I wasn't there is still going to be a statement that the police and the prosecution will intend to use against you at trial. But again, I'm not focusing here on trial. What I want to focus on is not necessarily what happens when we're in court, but what happens on the street and what you can do to protect yourself. So when you are confronted in a situation, and we will go into some hypotheticals later on, where the police is asking you a question and you believe that it's a question that maybe you're not free to leave, and maybe they're making it clear that you're being the subject of investigation, you can absolutely say, I would like to remain silent, and say this clearly, because after that, they can't ask you any more questions. So it's important that you go into it recognizing it and how important that particular language is to say, I would like to remain silent. So for example, you don't have to answer questions necessarily about where you're going, what you're doing, or where you live, but keep in mind, you may be required to identify yourself if police ask you for your name. So please don't give false names. Please don't give a false ID or false license. But also, I want you to bear in mind that what we're talking about right now are constitutional rights, right? So this is coming from the US Constitution. But some of these rights are they're all going to be from the US Constitution. But I also want to encourage you to look into your own state's laws and your own state's cases, because you will find that sometimes certain states have more protections than the US Constitution may have. So I also want to reframe what it means to say that you're remaining silent. A lot of people, and it's completely understandable, when they're confronted with a situation where they're being asked a bunch of questions by police, they have their uniforms on, they may have weapons that are visible, there's a lot of fear. And there's this air of authority that you feel you have to submit to, that you're compelled to submit to. I want to remind you that it's actually totally and completely well within your rights to remain silent, even if you're feeling as if you have to answer a question. And remember that silence does not equal admission of guilt. So if you're remaining silent, that can't be used against you, right? What can be used against you is when you're giving a statement. So again, this is a reminder that saying something like, I wasn't there, I didn't do it, that is still a statement, even if you believe that it's one that's exonerating you. So let's talk a little bit about some specific circumstances where you might want to exercise your right to remain silent. So let's say you're in a car, and in New York City, where I live, that might be a little different. If you're encountering the police, you're likely a pedestrian on the street. But if you're in a car, both the driver and passengers have the right to remain silent. So you can still exercise your right to remain silent, and should do so even when the police ask you questions about where you're going and where you're coming from. So I purposely put this in black so that everyone can be reminded that silence is golden when it comes to the police. So these are some ways that you can exercise your right to remain silent. You can say, I'm going to remain silent. I want to contact an attorney after you say that. These phrases immediately invoke your rights. Police are legally required to stop questioning you at this point. You may also find yourself in a situation where the police want you to sign something. Feel free to say, and in fact, I encourage you to say, I will not sign anything unless my attorney agrees I should do so. And you can also say, I will not talk to you or anyone about anything. So again, these are some ways in which you can really assert your right to remain silent. I think the best and strongest way is to simply say, I'm going to remain silent, and not say anything after that. So what if you're in a situation and you have the police and they're asking you these questions? Well, I also want you to feel safe. So not only do I want you to feel empowered by having this knowledge on what your constitutional rights are as it relates to the police, I want you to also feel as if you're safe. So we understand, and it is well documented, that that can be an extremely dangerous situation to be with the police. So I want you to remember these 4 things, okay? So the first is to stay calm. The second is to not run, resist, or obstruct the police. And the third is to not lie, because lying to the police is a crime, but the police can lie to you. And the reason why that's important is because many times I will have had clients who said, well, the police told me that they were going to help me if I was just honest and if I said X, Y, and Z. And what happened? Well, the police didn't help, because at that point, it's kind of out of their hands and it goes to the prosecution. And now you have the statement that's going to be used against you. So do not lie to the police, even though the police can lie to you. So remember that. And keep your hands where the police can see them. So don't make any sudden jerky movements or anything like that that could possibly jeopardize your own safety. So we just talked a little bit about the Fifth Amendment, and that's the right to remain silent. Now let's talk about the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that's from the Fourth Amendment. So the concept behind the Fourth Amendment is to protect your privacy from government intrusion. So police cannot search you, your possessions, your homes, etc., unless, and this again is a really broad overview, unless you consent, silence can equal consent, police obtain a search warrant, or there's an exception to the search warrant requirement that exists. We're going to get into a little bit of the differences because the Fourth Amendment is applicable, of course, to street encounters with the police, but it can look a little different depending upon the actual circumstance. So I say this because my intent here is not to trigger these complex legal analyses, because you're not going to have the time to do it, and I want to simplify this as much as possible. So we'll get into some of the different circumstances where the Fourth Amendment can apply. So going on, if the police want to come into your home, so we're going to be focusing on the home right now, but do not have a search warrant, you have the right to refuse to let them in. So you say loudly, I do not consent to this search. Again, I have had situations where clients thought that they had to comply with the police because they were at the door, even though the police may not have had a valid search warrant. And instead what happens is that the police say, well, we didn't need a valid search warrant because they consented. So that's how important it is to recognize that a search warrant is absolutely necessary when it comes to the home, unless, of course, there are certain exceptions. But for the most part, you should always ask, if you do find the police on your doorstep, if they have a search warrant, if they're trying to enter your home and search your home. So what is a warrant? Well, a warrant is a judicially issued order. It's court permission for the police to enter your home and search and seize evidence of a crime. So when the police do have a search warrant, they can in fact enter your home without permission. So these are the exceptions to the search warrant requirement as it relates to your home. Weapons within wingspan. So for example, this is exceptions to the search warrant requirement generally. So if they see a weapon on you, for example, they can quickly frisk you for their safety, for your own safety. They can search areas that are grabbable to you, so any areas that you can easily access. Hot pursuit, which is emergencies or other exigent circumstances. So if they know, they have probable cause to arrest you and you're running, for example, they can quickly do that too. Also, plain view doctrine. So if the public can see it and the cop can see it, cops will be able to legally see it, seize it. The most common example of this is if there's a car and they can see the handle of a gun when they're walking past your car, or drugs, for example, that's a pretty clear case of plain view doctrine, because you don't have a privacy interest in things that people can readily see and that police officers can readily see. And then, of course, there's also search to incident to lawful arrest. So that is basically when the police had probable cause to arrest you. They do, in fact, arrest you, and then they quickly pat you down and search you. So what about your car? We talked about the home a little bit, about the stringent requirements to enter your home, but it's a little different when it comes to your car. So unlike the home, the car can be searched without a warrant. And the thinking behind this is that unlike a home, a car is not a fixed entity. It's not a fixed building. It's easily movable. So for that reason, certain requirements for searching your car are a little more relaxed than it would be with your home, but that doesn't mean that you have no rights as it relates to your car. So when you have police officers stopping you, it's important to remember that you also have rights as it relates to your car. So to search your car, police must have probable cause. And probable cause, what is that? I've been throwing around that term a lot. Probable cause is enough facts and evidence to believe that you committed a crime. So it can't just be a mere hunch. It has to be something that's actually fixed in fact and evidence. So if you're pulled over for a traffic violation, such as failure to signal, that's not a crime. So this does not give police reason to search your car. If the police do have probable cause that you committed a crime, remember, traffic infractions are not crime, you can say no if they ask to search your car. So police, again, they can search a grabbable area without your consent, think under your seat, but a trunk, which is behind, is beyond a grabbable area. Now, when they would be searching your trunk is actually, for example, after they make an arrest and they take your car into the station or they impound it, that's when they would conduct what's called an inventory search. So they would go through the car and they would basically inventory everything that's in there. So that would be a valid search so long as the police actually had probable cause to arrest you. So again, now we're going to talk about reducing risk to yourself in this type of scenario when you're in a car. So ask, right? If you're a passenger, you can ask if you're free to leave. If yes, you may silently leave. Stop the car in a place that is safe as quickly as possible. Turn off the car, open the window partway, and place your hands on the wheel. If you're the passenger, put your hands on the dashboard if you're not free to leave, and avoid making sudden movements. And upon request, show police your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. So again, I want you to feel empowered, but I also want you to protect yourself during these types of confrontations with the police. I also want to talk now a little bit about what it means to be arrested or detained. What's the difference? Because sometimes you will hear officers when someone is asking, am I under arrest? And they say, no, you're being detained. So I want us to understand what exactly are the nuances between detention and an arrest. So what's the difference? Detention, police need reasonable suspicion that you are involved in a crime to detain you. So reasonable suspicion is different than probable cause. Reasonable suspicion, the way I think about it, is it's one level lower than probable cause. So the police, they need to have a specific articulable reason to believe that you are involved in a crime. So unlike probable cause, where it has to be based in facts or evidence, this needs to be an articulable reason. So sometimes what you'll hear is they'll say, I saw a bulky pocket and their hands were on their waistband. So they're not seeing what they think is a gun, but they believe it to be a gun based on the movement. And that's something where they could have reasonable suspicion to stop you. So the police must be able to put their reasonable suspicion into words. So you should ask, if you are not free to leave and you feel that you're not free to leave, feel free to ask, am I being detained? And then ask why, and remember that reason. This is unlike, we might kind of ask ourselves, well, how is this squaring with the right to remain silent? You're not giving statements. You're simply asking the police to put into words why you're being detained. And that's important because that's going to be something that you can figure out later on if you believed you were wrongfully arrested, or something you could tell your lawyer if you are in fact arrested. So remember, if you are being detained, anything you say can and will be used against you. Stay calm and control your words and actions. Oh, I apologize. Control your words and actions. So avoid arguing with the police, but firmly assert your rights. So there's a fine line between asserting your rights and doing something that could potentially jeopardize your own safety. So what I mean by that is don't argue with the police, right? Because remember, they're armed, they're in uniform, and there are many of them. So don't argue with them, but exercise these rights, because this is a powerful way of protecting yourself and also ensuring that you are going to be treated with dignity. So never run or physically resist, even if you think that the stop was unreasonable or unlawful. And ask if you're free to leave. If they say yes, then do so. Do not consent to searches. So if a cop stops you while you're in a car and they say, do you mind if I take a quick look? Say no. And if they say no, you may be patted down. So for example, if they say that you're not being detained, you may be patted down, or apologize. If you are being detained, you may be patted down and anything within your grabbable area may be searched. So that's something known as a stop and frisk. What if you're under arrest? Well, under arrest, as I explained, is different than detention. So when you're under arrest, that's because the police believe they have probable cause to arrest you. So again, they have a reason to believe that you committed a crime, and their belief comes from facts or evidence. So if you're under arrest and they say you're under arrest, say you wish to remain silent and ask for a lawyer immediately. And say it clearly. Say, I am invoking my right to remain silent, or I would like to remain silent and I want a lawyer. Do not give explanations or excuses. Again, I want to underscore that sometimes the police will make promises or give the illusion that they can fulfill certain promises for you. So what does that look like? That can look like, for example, the police saying, we'll go easy on you. We'll let you go. We want you to go home, but just tell us what happened and then we'll let you go home. Don't fall for it. And again, this is because I'm not necessarily saying that everyone always has bad intent, but what I am saying is that I want you to be maximally protected and want you to be aware and savvy as to why police officers may say that, which is they want to elicit information from you. So police do not have the ability to help you out. Don't fall for it. And you do have the right to make a phone call if you're arrested. The police cannot listen to that conversation on the phone call if you call a lawyer. That would be privileged and confidential information. If you're under arrest and you find that you're in a small room, for example, and they're asking you questions, and during that they ask you if you want water or cigarettes, and then they take that and dispose of it, remember that police can in fact use these items to obtain your DNA. So this is something that I hope would never happen to anyone here, but in cases such as gun cases, right, there's a way that they can actually lift the DNA from these items that they'll say were abandoned. So you have a privacy interest in your own DNA. The police cannot get your DNA unless you abandon the sample or unless they actively get a court order to get your DNA. So that's why I'm bringing this up, because again, we don't want to volunteer information. We don't want to volunteer our DNA. We don't want to volunteer anything that we have a privacy interest in. Do not make any written statements. Do not make any decisions without a lawyer. So if they write, sometimes I've gotten cases where there's a written statement and it's very clear my client didn't write it. However, they've signed it because they thought that that's what they had to do. Don't do that, right? I want you to feel empowered enough to know that there's no amount of coercion in this particular circumstance that's going to make you voluntarily give up your constitutional rights. I want you to protect them at all times. What if you believe your rights were violated? What if you believe you were subject to unlawful detention or an unlawful arrest? Write down everything you remember, including badge numbers, officer names. You can ask for business cards from the police. Even if you weren't in fact arrested, let's say that you just had a police officer come up to you and say, I just want to ask you a couple of questions, and you don't feel comfortable and they're making it kind of clear that you can't leave even though you're not under arrest, you're not being detained necessarily. Ask them for their business card. Another tip I would give is get contact information for witnesses. So let's say you see someone and they're filming you and you realize that this person might have really important information relating to your arrest. See if you can get in touch with them. If you're injured, seek medical attention and document injuries. That's really important. It's so important to take images, any images that you can, of your injuries, because this will become really useful if you decide later on to sue the police for experiencing police brutality. and look into filing a written complaint with the police department's Internal Affairs Bureau or Civilian Complaint Board. What if you're the one who's witnessing police brutality? This is where your First Amendment rights are actually going to come in. So stand at a safe distance, and if safe, use your phone to record, as long as you do not interfere or obstruct police. The reason why I'm saying this is because sometimes what will happen is if you're too close, you're asking questions, or you're doing anything that the police can say you're basically obstructing them in their administration of their official governmental duties, they can in fact arrest you for obstructing governmental administration. That's a misdemeanor crime here in New York City. So another thing I would say is if you're recording the police, before you do so, you should always be aware of what exactly your state's recording laws are. Certain states require that you alert people that you're recording them. So what that may look like when you're recording the police is simply saying, I'm recording right now. But don't necessarily say that in a way that's confrontational or in a way that's going to jeopardize your own safety in that particular circumstances. So police officers cannot demand to view your phone without a warrant. They cannot delete your photos or videos. If they say, I want to take a look at your phone quickly because they notice that you're recording, don't turn over your phone, right? Your phone is a really, really sensitive entity. It's a really sensitive apparatus that contains all of your most private information. So for that reason, the police can't just look inside your phone. They can't take it from you for no reason. They can't go through it. They would need a search warrant for your phone as well. If an officer asks you to hand over your phone or demands you to stop recording, politely but firmly tell the officer that you do not consent to doing so and remind them that you have a First Amendment right to take photos or videos. Police officers are public servants, so when they are in the public doing their job, such as investigating or arresting, they don't have a reasonable expectation of privacy when they're performing their jobs. At that point, they're public officials and they're in the public sphere. Again, it's a good tip to write down everything you can remember. So names, badges, if weapons were being used, any of this information would be very useful if you're witnessing police brutality. Also consider giving your contact information to the person who was stopped by police in case they want to file a complaint or lawsuit against the officers. Now, I know this is tricky because what if you never see them again? That's something where, maybe you will see them later on, maybe recognize them as a member of your community, but do not necessarily approach while the officers, or I would say don't approach while the officers are effectuating an arrest. That's something where if you recognize that person and you see them later on, that may be useful to them. So now we're going to go into some sample conversations with the police. This is a conversation where a police officer may just approach you and they don't have either reasonable suspicion or probable cause to either detain or arrest you. So we have a cop who says, can I ask you a couple of questions? You say, am I free to leave or am I being detained? And they say, I just have a couple of questions. So they're kind of evading the answer. They're not giving you a direct answer as to whether or not you're detained. There you can say, I choose not to talk to you and end the encounter and walk away. Conversation number 2, this is going to be a little different. The cop says, can I ask you a couple of questions? You say, am I free to leave or am I being detained? And they say, you're being detained. Your question there is going to be, why am I being detained? Remember the reason, memorize the response, and then invoke your right to remain silent. Avoid giving statements at all costs. Conversation number 3, this one's a little simpler. You're under arrest. That's when you can say, I'm invoking my right to remain silent and I want to contact a lawyer. At that point, the officers legally cannot ask you any more questions. And that's when you invoked your right to remain silent and your right to have an attorney. So that's pretty much it at this point. I'm opening up the floor for questions. Thank you so much.
Norma, that was amazing. Thank you so much. I have learned the difference between being detained and arrested. I have learned how and protect my rights. I have learned that even if I am undocumented, I have rights because these rights are coming from the Constitution. So thank you so much. There are some questions in the chat that I'm going to send over to you. I have
Great.
started answering some, but I am going to make sure that you double check me, right?
Great.
So one of the first questions is, can immigration authorities use evidence obtained through an unlawful search or seizure against me in immigration proceedings?
That's a great question. So immigration proceedings are a little different. At that point, your criminal case hopefully would likely have been resolved either through a plea or a dismissal. The immigration authorities or immigration judge won't necessarily be looking into the specific circumstances of your arrest. What really matters here is the search through an unlawful search or seizure is in a suppression hearing in the criminal case. So just to give you a little bit of background, you have a suppression hearing because you're challenging the legality of the fruits of the search or seizure. So what happens is the prosecution has the burden to show that it was not unlawful. They present evidence, there's a whole hearing, and then hopefully the defense is able to suppress all of that evidence that was seized unlawfully. That's where it really matters. It's different in immigration proceedings because really that's kind of limited to the purview as to whether or not you're in the country, and I'm saying this in huge air quotes, but illegally, and that means in violation of INA. And then they'll ask you questions or they'll look into your criminal convictions to see if that bars you from certain forms of relief. So it won't necessarily be used against you in the way that we might see it used against you in a criminal proceeding, but it does create a chain of events where you could get a conviction, or let's say it's dismissed. And then at that point, your immigration attorney will use that information to try and preserve your eligibility for any form of relief in immigration court. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but it's basically to say that it won't really come into play the same way that it would in a criminal proceeding.
And that was a perfect answer because it is related to a second question that I gave more simplistic. I just said yes. So the question was, can I challenge the legality of a search or seizure conducted by law enforcement as an undocumented individual? So yeah.
Absolutely. So it doesn't matter whether or not you're undocumented, so long as you're in the United States, the Constitution applies to you. So if you were the subject of an unlawful search and seizure, you absolutely have standing to challenge that in court. So again, that's going to be challenged in a criminal proceeding where it's the state versus you. And that's where you would challenge the legality of the stop, the legality of the arrest as well. And you would try to move to suppress any and all evidence that comes from that unlawful search or seizure. And of course, let's say you decide you want to sue the police. You're absolutely well within your rights to sue the police, even if you're undocumented, and you can use evidence that you were stopped unlawfully. So again, my overarching answer here is always remember that these constitutional rights exist to protect you.
Another question. If I am in a car and the police turn on the light and order me to stop, but it is very dark and I feel afraid, what should I do to go to the place that is with more lights?
That's a great question. So one thing that I would recommend is if the police come over and you're terrified because you're in the middle of a highway, for example, a really rural highway and there's no one else, one thing that you could say is just, I would feel more comfortable if we pulled up over this gas station over here. And that's something that you could possibly try and work out with police. But again, we really don't know because the police can, be really volatile. So something that I would recommend really is try and see if you can turn on lights in your car, maybe record as well. So remember, you have the right to record. So that's one way that you can have documentary evidence of what's happening to you in that particular place and time.
What if I say I don't consent to any questions and the cops get physical and put their hands on me?
Yeah, and I've seen that in body-worn camera. So I would say, again, that this is a really problematic stop, right? So or rather a problematic encounter. So if they say to you, if you're invoking your right to remain silent and they start to get physical with you, so they're trying to handcuff you, or they're trying to, intimidate you into answering, I would just continue to say, you can ask questions such as, am I free to leave? Am I free to leave? And really just try to not answer questions. I have seen circumstances where we've seen, really young people who are being stopped and they're told they're not free to leave. And what's incredible and empowering in those is that sometimes these teenagers in particular are really, really, really well equipped to handle it because they know their rights. And what happens is they keep saying, I'm not answering your questions, I'm invoking my right to remain silent. And the police at that point, they actually, there's not much more that they can do. So if they do get physical, again, this is something where I would document it. I would take photos and I would look into suing those police officers, or I would look into filing a complaint against those police officers. So if you are in a situation where that happens and they end up not detaining you or arresting you, ask for their business cards. Take those business cards and gather as much information as you can from those encounters and look into challenging the police action, because there are mechanisms in place to discipline police officers, and there are mechanisms in place where you can file a complaint against them, even if you don't necessarily want to sue them. So that is one way that you can maximally protect yourself in that situation.
Thank you. What happens if I have a roommate and the police have a warrant for him, but I am undocumented? How can I protect myself?
So if the police have a warrant, and I believe in this question, it's probably asking for a search warrant, or not a search warrant, pardon me, an arrest warrant. If it's a search warrant, let me know. But if it's an arrest warrant, that warrant is only specific to the arrest of that person. It can't be transferred to anyone else, right? Unless, of course, the police arrest your roommate and you're there and you're doing something that gives them reasonable suspicion or probable cause. But I would just, in that situation, do what we have been discussing, which is remain silent and don't get involved. Watch from a distance. And if they try to mess with you, be firm, be polite, ask if you're being detained. And if they say no, then you're free to leave.
Perfect. The next question is, what can I do if police seize my property? What are the steps?
Great question. So this really depends probably in the state and jurisdiction you're in. But here in New York City, for example, if the police seize your property, they have to give you a property voucher. The property voucher basically says everything they seized from your person, from your home, from your car, and the value of money, for example, that they may have taken from you. What you would need to do, again, it depends upon your jurisdiction, but speaking from my experience here in New York City, you would get that property voucher, you would go to the clerk's office and it would give you that information. You present your license, whatever kind of state issued ID you have, any sort of formal governmental issued ID that you have. And that's the way you're able to get your voucher. And if they don't return things, right, you can talk to your lawyer. So for example, a really common circumstance in DWIs is the car is taken and it's impounded and the DA wishes to use it as evidence. So what you can do there is you can work with your attorney to file a motion to get your car back. And typically, if it's being used as evidence, which in this circumstance a car would be, unfortunately, you can't get it back until after your case ends, because that's when it's no longer needed as evidence. But if they take things from you and they don't intend to use it as evidence and it's not marked as evidence, you can go to the property clerk and it'll have that information on the property voucher to get your items back. What's really amazing about some of the public defense offices here in New York City, and I worked at one in the Bronx, is that we have civil attorneys who also readily help individuals recuperate their property that was seized from the police. So when in doubt, ask your attorney if you are represented and they can help you with those steps.
Awesome. So what should I say if I am driving and I have a license, but I am undocumented and the police asks for my license or ID?
Okay. So you do have to turn over your license in this circumstance. Don't lie to the police, right? If you don't have a driver's license, that would be different because that is in fact a crime if you're driving without a license. At least in New York City it is. It's a misdemeanor and it can also be a felony. But if you're driving, hand over your license, but don't ask any questions about whether or not you're a US citizen. If they ask you those questions, say, I'm not answering any questions, or say, I don't see why that's necessary here. And if they keep pushing you, always invoke your right to remain silent. Say, I'm remaining silent about that. Do not about that, because far too often, unfortunately, I have seen situations where someone gets arrested by the police. They are asked questions about their citizenship. They believe it to just be an administrative step in their arrest, and they'll volunteer that information. And then sadly, it triggers a notice to appear, which in deportation proceedings is the document that basically triggers the proceeding against you. So I would just not answer any questions. It doesn't matter that you're undocumented. It's so long if you have a license and it's a valid license, just turn that over and they shouldn't be asking you any questions about your citizenship. And if they do, be firm and be polite about the fact that you're not answering that question.
Awesome. I think it is worth noting that ICE and New York City Police are two different or like entities, right? So just to make sure, when you're asking Norma a question, if you can identify if you're asking about being stopped by the police or being stopped by ICE, because I think the answers are a little different depending. Next question, and I think we're going to take maybe like two more after this one. So what if a car is stopped and only the driver has a license and has documents, but everyone else is undocumented, and the police asks for ID? What can we answer?
So this goes to your point, Dorian, which is it's two separate entities, right? So if the police stop you and they stop the driver and they ask the driver for the license, they'll have to turn that over. If you are someone who doesn't have status and you're in the car, of course, that is very scary to be stopped by the police. You can simply ask at that point, right? Remember what we said earlier in the presentation, if someone doesn't have status and they're a passenger in a car, they can ask, am I free to leave? And if the police say yes, they can do so silently. If the police asks them for IDs, right? Again, I think that might be a situation where you can volunteer your name. And if you don't have ID, you can say you don't have ID, but you do have a name and you give them a real name, your name. But this is not really a situation where I can't, or rather I should say that this is a perfect situation where the person who is in the car and doesn't have status can just ask if they're free to leave.
Perfect, thank you. Next question, can I refuse to provide access to my electronic devices or passwords if law enforcement requests them due to my undocumented status? And I would add, in general, can you refuse to,
Yeah, so definitely. So just like your wallet, just like your home, just like really personal effects that contain a lot of really sensitive information, the police need a search warrant to search your phone. They cannot just take it and go through it. They cannot just take it and ask you for your passcode to look in through it. So the reason I say this is because the most important takeaway, I think, from this PowerPoint and from this presentation is whether or not you're documented does not vitiate or negate your constitutional rights. So just because you don't have status in this country doesn't mean that now the police can treat you however they want to. It doesn't mean that you no longer have rights and that you have less rights than someone who is a US citizen. So I want you to remember that you can say no, but don't say it's because of your status, right? Ask, do you have a warrant? And if they say no, then say, and I'm not giving you access to my phone. So that's the important thing to do. I basically want to frame this as make the police work to get into your items that contain a lot of really personal and private information. That's why these, the US Constitution exists and these amendments exist, is because they recognize that there shouldn't be overreach. There shouldn't be police officers, governments, government actors just going through your personal effects without complying and comporting with the law, and without also ensuring that your rights aren't being violated.
Thank you. And our last question for today is, are there any legal remedies or actions I can take if my privacy rights were violated by law enforcement?
Right, so definitely, right? So I want to remind people that an arrest just doesn't end there, right? It starts a criminal proceeding against you. And that's not the venue where you would challenge the legality of your stop and seizure, but that's not necessarily a remedy. You wouldn't be getting damages, for example. You wouldn't be necessarily winning a lawsuit, right? It's basically a case of the state versus you in that situation. But let's say that you were arrested and then they decide not to prosecute you, right? And you're released. And now you're like, well, what now? They said that they had probable cause, they arrested me, but they decided not to actually pursue me anymore, right? They decided that they no longer want to start a case against me. What do I do now? That's where you can absolutely contact civil rights attorneys, and civil rights attorneys can help guide you through the process. So that's one route that you can take. Another route, again, is if you wish, you can also file a formal complaint against the specific police officers who were involved in the unlawful arrest. And you can complain to your local police department's Internal Affairs Bureau or through the Civilian Complaint Board. So those are two entities that you can address beyond going through the lawsuit route with the civil rights attorney.
All right. Thank you so much, Norma. I want to say that this was so valuable. And for those on the call, so as we mentioned, Norma works for Latino Justice, right? They are veterans in protecting Latino rights, right? And protecting our community's rights and advocating for us. So there was a question on how we can contact Norma. I am going to give you the Latino Justice General phone number, and then we'll talk to Norma. If you are in touch with the National Dominican Day Parade and want to have Norma's direct contact information, you can talk to me and I will make that happen. But for now, I'm going to give you Latino Justice contact information, and you can ask for her there. But again, thank you so much. These partnerships mean so much to me, to the National Dominican Day Parade, and to everyone who cares about advocating for our community, right? There were so many questions today, and you would think, well, people get stopped by law enforcement all the time, they know what to do. But the truth is that the more we do this, the more we realize that they don't, right? And we need to protect our community. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Norma, again, thanks a million.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.